Hey guys, it's Mark here from the ETF Tracker Show, and this is episode 9 of our Interviews with Experts series. And we've got a special one today, as have all the other ones, but this one is special for those that are looking at Bitcoin, whether you're already an investor into Bitcoin via the various exchanges, or you've been tracking along with our newsletter showing what's been going on overseas with Bitcoin ETFs. And in this case, it's a homegrown one because it's all about Monochrome Asset Management. We've got our special guest, Jeff Yu, who's the CEO over there, and he is applying for a Bitcoin ETF here in Australia. So we talk about that, a little bit more about Jeff's interesting history. If you didn't know, he used to be the Binance Australia CEO. So we definitely talk a lot about Bitcoin here, how it can be useful, and yeah, more of that. And check out the show notes. See you there. Okay, welcome back, guys. We've got an amazing guest here. We've got Jeff Yu from Monochrome Asset Management. Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. Lovely to be here.
Perfect. So for those of you who might not be aware, Jeff has a very interesting background in the world of asset management as well as Bitcoin. So what we like to do, Jeff, is before we get started into the heart of the interview, we like to ask our guests a little bit more about their background. So for those who might not know that much about you, could you tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into Bitcoin, how you got to become the CEO of Binance Australia?
Oh, that's thanks for that question. It gives me the moment to reflect on what's been going for the past few years. So I first heard of Bitcoin on a Reddit thread actually in 2013. That was during my research into the aftermath of the secret financial crisis. Mm-hmm. So I was always intrigued with how fiscal policies, monetary policies around the world can affect not just economies but also the broader social aspects of it. My training and my background was in architecture, surprisingly.
Wow.
But I've always been intrigued with the economics aspect of architecture. More specifically, I've always been intrigued about why buildings look in a particular way at a particular era. And throughout my research and my interest, it kind of led me to come to the conclusion that architecture is pretty much a time capsule of the society sort of behaviors and social economic situations of a particular era, of a particular time. So it led me into the finance rabbit hole since. I've always been interested in macro, micro finance, not just in Australia, but globally. Bitcoin was just a blip in the radar back then. I didn't really take it that seriously because, like anyone that's first got introduced to Bitcoin, you have obviously a lot of questions like, how is this thing going to work? Is government going to control it, shut it down, and all this stuff? I was a skeptic back then, but throughout my years of research, I built up this thesis about where this sits within from a just a pure portfolio allocation perspective. For my thesis in about 2 years, and it took me a while because back then there wasn't many good podcasts like what we are doing here today to help me navigate the space. And then I kind of wanted to start my own team about building things around Bitcoin. So I actually started I was almost about to start a e-commerce payments platform that runs payments on top of Bitcoin.
Wow.
And Caleb Yo, which is one of my very good friends still today. Like back then, he was running a startup called Travel by Bit. It was a Queensland government funded startup that was trying to boost tourism in regional Queensland by introducing various methods of unique ways, including crypto payments. So I was called there from my startup to be the chief product officer and sort of like a co-founder role to help build out that capabilities within the business. So we did manage to build out that payment processor that built this is developed on top of Bitcoin. We did it. We launched it in Brisbane Airport. So Brisbane Airport is actually the world's first airport that accepts payments in digital currencies.
Did not know
so that's
that.
something that most people did not know that.
Yeah.
There was a whole hoo-ha before even the El Salvador stuff. And And back then, Travel by Bit has an OTC arm called Invest by Bit. It wasn't a main business case because no one was really looking into that space that deeply back then from an investment perspective yet. But I took interest of that because I've always been interested in investments in finance. So I basically told Caleb, like, look, why not I take out that arm of the business and see what grows from it? Yeah. And soon after, Binance came on board as a strategic investor, invested, into the company, and then led us to, give us some freedom to build and test, the market. We eventually launched Invest by Bit as a OTC brokerage, registered with Austrac as a DC operator, digital currency exchange operator, and then that rolled over into Binance Lite, which was a exchange/brokerage where you can go to a news agent to purchase, digital currencies.
Wow!
And soon after, based on all the experience, all the feedback we got from our customers, we launched the next, the obvious version of it, which is the full exchange. So Binance Australia, was the progression from Binance Lite, become from a broker to an exchange, and it has been the biggest and most liquid digital asset exchange in Australia since. And I'm very proud of what the team has achieved over there, and it still is today. Even though I've left Binance Australia in April this year to start, my asset management business called Monochrome.
Yeah, it's amazing. They've got you've got amazing pedigree, first of all, and Binance is really a great kind of resource for people who may not know or wanted easy access to the ability to get into Bitcoin and other coins. I mean, full disclosure, I use Binance, right, for some of my investments into that space. But you just mentioned Monochrome there. So for people that may not be aware, like I saw that you'd moved on to, and that's what actually sparked my interest as well, and seeing you in the news talking about this. But can you tell us a little bit more about Monochrome Asset Management? And we'll include, this stuff in the show notes. But who are your clients and what kind of services do you provide over there?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So Monochrome Asset Management, we are a traditional funds management company. We operate under an AFSL to provide wholesale access into, investment products such as digital assets like Bitcoin. So we deal with, professional investors, family offices, high net worth individual. Most of the fiduciary markets that we target, pretty much the clients of Monochromes. So our team has over 100 years of combined experience in, traditional financial markets, funds management, and also digital asset investments. And, we have soon sort of positioned ourselves as Australia's leading investment management firm that's specializing in regulated access into this digital asset market.
No, that's amazing. And I saw one of the first things that came up as, hey, I need to look into these guys was back in July, I think it was, or around that time, there was news talking about how you guys were looking at launching a Bitcoin ETF, or your intentions to launch that. And I know that, ASIC has put out the consultation paper, but just in terms of the Bitcoin ETF, can you tell our viewers a little bit more about that? What are you thinking there?
Yeah. Obviously, I come from the background of digital assets, and my team comes from the background of traditional finance. So, the immediate problem that we've identified very early on with this industry, compared to a lot of major markets out there, we'll talk about it later, is that Australia seems to, be really, going really hard and really strong on the retail front in terms of adoption. But it's crickets in the institutional and wholesale space. And the primary reason behind that, other than service providers, there wasn't any much big movement in terms of service providers like insurance, custodians, investment managers, for that matter, that wants to sort of enter this market, because Australia is always deemed like a smaller market compared to, say, the US or the UK and Europe. And the other problem is that obviously institutions wouldn't touch exchanges with a 9-foot pole because of strict mandates, because of accumulation procedures that mandates them to go through a particular compliance mandated route or a regulated route. And exchanges are in Australia. I want to make this clear to people that I run an exchange, so it's ironic to hear this from me, is that exchanges are a good avenue for retail traders to trade through digital currencies, and fiat currencies like the Australian dollars, and they are regulated by AUSTRAC, which monitors transactions to prevent fraud, or prevent terrorist financing and those kind of things. But what they are not for is, say if you are a super fund, or you are a family offices that have a very strict mandate on accumulating digital assets or new assets, or any assets in particular, the crypto exchanges in Australia don't have the licensing capabilities, licenses to provide those service, frankly. And also, most importantly, the custody requirements for super funds and for large instos, that it just doesn't suffice when looking at crypto exchanges generally in Australia. That's why what you hear from the market is always you can buy Bitcoin from us, but they will never tell you where to store it, because they can't offer that advice, and they can't offer that service. And that's something that bothers me for a while, because I've been feeling a strong industry push for a product properly caters for installs in Australia, and with my role as CEO of Binance Australia back then. And that's the reason why I founded Monochrome Asset Management was that, there is a big gap, of install access and regulated products into these markets. And an ETF is an obvious progression of that, because it shifts the operational, the operational risk and custodial risk, and, basically just licensing and regulatory risk, from unregulated platforms into experienced and regulated, issuers, managers, and those sort of things. And I think in the interest of consumer protection, we really need to step forward. I think the time is right. The digital asset industry has grown from maybe a few hundred million in all assets under custody in few brokerages and exchanges in Australia in, say, 2016, 2017, and to today, I estimate that it's at least 10 billion of assets held on unregulated digital currency platforms. So that is a big risk for me personally, when I look at how this thing will play out for the next 3 years, for the next 5 years. How do we solve this problem? Exchanges aren't the particular ones at fault here, because there is no licensing regime for them to register, even if they want to. So my goal here is to make sure that Australia stays on top of the game, because you see big markets like Canada has an ETF, US has a slew of pending ETFs. We've got ETFs in Europe, ETFs in coming up even in Dubai, even in Brazil, those countries. We're seeing this thing is coming more seriously, and there's a lot more institutional appetite and backing into digital assets like Bitcoin in 2021 and above.
It's really interesting because, a couple of things there, like we have been tracking what's been going on, in our newsletter and our podcast, the end of the week exchange traded Fridays, and seeing a lot of listings coming up from the US. And when I scour the internet for ETF articles for global, there's always one or two, or there's progress on Bitcoin. It was like a Bitcoin ETF straight up, and then it's now looking at futures, and because the SEC is more favorable towards the futures. And the thing that's interesting is like what you're doing here in Australia. Yes, the retail traders can do it, but wholesale, if our superannuation firms can get into being able to buy a regulated and a wholesale kind of product, that's going to be very interesting, because a lot of people might not know this, but Australia has the 4th biggest pool of pension fund money in the world, behind US, Canada, and I think it might be Japan or something like that. But, we've got a lot of money here to put to play, to assets like this. So it's great what it is that you're doing. And you just mentioned, the applications there in the US, and over here in Australia, we mentioned a little bit before, but ASIC, right? They've got that consultation paper that's out. That's the body that regulates this. And if we get approval from them, and I think there's probably a few more steps and stuff there. There's the exchanges as well, but what it would take to get to there, like when they put that paper out, you've had some thoughts on that. I'd be interested in, seeing, we can refer to some of the notes that you've had, whether it's on LinkedIn or the Monochrome page, but what are your thoughts on that right now regarding that move by ASIC to put out a consultation paper? Is it positive for the hopes of a local Bitcoin ETF?
I think it's definitely a proactive move, a very proactive move from ASIC, and showing that progression of understanding of the asset class from, say, 2017, where we usually would get a straight no. Even if you say a year before, something like this wouldn't have happened. But obviously, a combination of domestic and international push and demand has created this environment where probably the regulators will think that this is the right time to start thinking seriously about this as everyone is progressing pretty much very quickly around the world in different regulatory environment jurisdictions. And we have been a very strong advocate about a regulation, more regulation into this space. We are all about elevating the standards of service and robustness of Australian digital asset sectors and operators within the sectors. And what ASIC is proposing, in CP343 is, I feel personally, it's a net good for operators because it brings in more robustness and consumer protection in the long run. Monochrome has, submitted a response, a public response back to ASIC regarding CP343 as well. And that's something that, our head of legal compliance, Derek, which comes from IFM Investors, has been on top of that for a while. And he's also leading the charge for the ETF project as well here in Monochrome.
Perfect. Well, yeah, we definitely want to link to when. So that does that go out in public when ASIC puts out here's all the responses? And do you know when that's going to be?
I think we'll see something soon in the coming months. Okay. Keep in mind that's also Senator Bragg's Senate Select hearing, Senate Select Committee hearing about Australia as a technology platform, and that's something that I've heard is coming out next month in October. So we'll keep an eye on that, as well as ASIC's conclusion on the CP343. We're definitely keeping a really close eye on that because it's really important to be on top of this, is because we are in a very pivotal moment in Australia when it comes to bringing that shift from retail into instos when it comes to digital assets.
Perfect. And, we'll definitely keep an eye on it here as well. Now, just as we had mentioned, and you'd said these, so overseas, there's been a lot of movement in Bitcoin. Canada's had the first Bitcoin ETF. The SEC's got a decision pending on that, but they've indicated, a bit of positivity towards Bitcoin futures. Do you see us going down either a US or a Canadian type path, or do you see things in Europe, for example, that are more in line with what we're going to do? What's your kind of thoughts? We're not going to hold you to it. This is not a crystal ball thing, but just based on what you've seen now going on overseas, what's the pathway you think for us?
Yeah, so the team at Monochrome is pretty familiar with the Canadian model, just because we have an advisor that has launched a Canadian Bitcoin ETF before. And obviously Canada and Australia has pretty similar, but yet still different in terms of regulatory and frameworks when it comes to handling products like this. Canada treats Bitcoin. The OSC came down and treats Bitcoin. I think don't hold me to it, but I think it's a commodity from memory. In Australia, it really comes down to what does ASIC think Bitcoin falls into. Monochrome believes that Bitcoin fits the type into the financial asset class instead of a pure commodity, because it allows Bitcoin is effectively very similar to commodity. That's why you see that split between financial assets and commodity from different countries in the world. And I think that it's very important to get a classification correct, because that's a predecessor of getting an ETF up and running, and also getting REs involved, getting insurers, getting financial advisors, platforms, with pretty much any fiduciaries that have a requirement to get an AFS authorization to deal with digital assets. I think that first step needs to happen, and we're pretty much on top of that with our liaison with our team, Monochrome's team, with ASIC and regulators and treasuries on that. So we'll see what comes up the next few months.
Oh, that'll be really good. And I was going to ask next, but I think we've kind of answered it through some of the previous kind of previous things that we've spoken about. Like, it was going to be about when Bitcoin ETFs do list here, and you guys are on board with that. Do you see that being bought by institutions like super funds, managed funds, insurers, and all that? So we've kind of spoken a bit about that, but let's expand on that a bit more. I mean, when it does happen, do you think that there's already firms, and you don't have to, there's no naming of names here, but do you see firms already knocking at the door for that kind of, investable asset?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's Monochrome is pretty on top of that, to be honest, because We got a head of distribution, Craig. So Craig used to lead as a senior executive team on Rest Super. So,
Oh, wow.
obviously one of Australia's biggest industry supers. So that's something that he deals with pretty much in terms of what the appetite is from that world into digital assets like Bitcoin. And also we have Monochrome has a wholesale MIS product at this stage. It's offered under an IM, which is it's the highest duty of care available for investors in Australia at this stage. And so we have launched that product into the advice industry, and we've gotten really good feedback from the professionals working in the financial service industries in Australia. And we definitely see a wall of appetite. For example, we recently ran a survey on Financial Standard about the question was how many financial advisors have clients reaching out to them about digital assets over the past 12 months. The response was that over 75% of them had inquiries. Wow. So the problem with this industry is that financial advisors are getting the pressure from their clients, getting the bottom-up pressure to signal to them that you need to be ready to give me advice on this new asset class, because it's been so many years, been so many ETFs around the world already. That's like how can I deal with this? Make sense of it in my portfolio or pretty much anything. The problem is for financial advisors is that the PI cover usually don't cover advice on Bitcoin, and also obviously there isn't much products out there that it will fall into their APLs, the product list. So this is a big problem for financial advisors to put in a Bitcoin product, say go to an exchange or this kind of stuff into a statement of advice. It's pretty much impossible at this stage. But a Bitcoin ETF could potentially change that, because if you have a Bitcoin ETF, it's pretty much just an open season for investors and financial professionals to incorporate those products into very traditional structures, and that's really where I think the potential is. And the interesting thing with Bitcoin and ETF is that, right, look, the ETF market in Australia, it's like a little bit over $100 billion. Obviously we got a very big managed fund market here in Australia, but let's say 100 to 150 billion. In the US alone, there is one fund manager, digital asset fund manager, has 60 billion in asset under management. Wow. So this shows you how much appetite there is when it comes to a Bitcoin product. And also keep in mind that in Canada, the first ETF, Purpose ETF, went live in early this year. The FUM grew from nothing to $1 billion in just 7 weeks of trading. Wow. That's impressive, right? It doesn't really happen in the ETF space. It's very rare that an ETF is launching and there's already an established demand. Usually ETFs gets launched and then you got a distribution phase and you get that thing rolling and growing. I think there's going to be a big opportunity with launching a Bitcoin ETF in Australia. But it also comes with its own set of challenges, mainly getting all the ducks lined up, and also depends on regulatory approval. Monochrome is here to work with the best. For example, we just recently announced our appointment of our new Chief Operating Officer and Head of Digital Markets, Jeff Liu. So Jeff comes from BNY Mellon. And he will be integral to the company to get this thing up and running, as potentially Australia is one of the first Australian Bitcoin ETFs here, alongside the other senior management in this companies like Derek, which I mentioned previously, which was from IFM Investors. So we do have a good team, we do have a good strategy. We don't want to disclose too much on that, but keep it close on us, I would say.
Well, that's really good. And look, we'll link those things in the show notes. And it's really interesting. One of the things you mentioned before was that for the wholesale, so retail, we can go out and buy Bitcoin from various exchanges from my phone. I can buy stuff overseas or whatever it is, right? But it's a little bit hard for wholesale. There's so many more rules. And it's kind of ironic because there's the informational disadvantage that retail traders have. wholesale has, institutions have much more at their fingertips with Bloomberg terminals and access to cool data sets. Yet, because of compliance and all the rules that are there to protect end investors, it actually is a little bit harder for them to be free flowing with just buying into anything that they see as an opportunity. So it's interesting to see that kind of dichotomy play out there. But look, you guys have great and really interesting insights into this. And no doubt, if people are just hearing about you for the first time, I'm encouraging you guys out there to follow along, whether it's on LinkedIn or on Monochrome's page. You guys have a blog on your page, is that right?
Yeah, we do have our blog, just monochrome.co, and you can navigate through that website pretty easily. It's a very simple website to navigate. And depending on when the show is going live, we are 24th of September today. But I reckon when you release this podcast, we would have launched Monochrome Research already. So it's a research capability within our team. There's currently 7 people on the research team that is committed to come up with CPD credit content for financial advisors, for financial professionals in Australia to help navigate internally or with their clients when it comes to topics around digital assets. Things about like we've gone past the 101s about Bob and Alice 101s. We're here to sort of guide that process, very quantitative process about how do you fit Bitcoin into a portfolio? How do you put that, how do you manage the risk? How do you quantify, things that are in this space that has so much questions around them, to demystify and demyth a lot of things within this industry. And that's really exciting to me. We got our new head of research on board. He's working closely under our CIO, Dave, who used to be a hedge fund manager. And that's really what we want to sort of put out in the market, is that Monochrome Research will be the number one go-to, domain expert when it comes to institutional digital assets, education content. And backtrack a little bit. You mentioned about how easy it is for retail customers to purchase, digital assets. To me, I feel that it is a good and bad thing. Good thing is that obviously the barriers of entry is low. The bad thing is that the barrier of entry is low. Because it also opens up a lot of avenues for retail investors to get exploited from unlicensed operators or a lot of finfluencers these days. ASIC just put out a announcement warning people about the pump and dump commentaries online, and that's a real big problem because this is a young industry. Bitcoin is a nascent asset class, but compared to a lot of other crypto assets in this industry, Bitcoin is still relatively fine when it comes to a risk management perspective, if you know how to deal with it. But as a retail investor, if you're exposed to so many thousands of different cryptocurrencies out there, and they're all different types of crypto, I want to make it clear that there's thousands and thousands of crypto tokens, and not all of them are in the same basket. And if people don't know what they are dealing with, they might walk into a grocery shop and pick up a bottle of milk thinking that it's oranges, and then when they go back, open it up, and oh, this is not what I expect. Oops. And that's something that I'm a big advocate of. This is something that I've been pushing for many years, is clearer classification of the different product tranches within the digital asset ecosystem. I'll give you an example, like Bitcoin, it's like digital properties, digital commodities. It's like the most boring of all. It's like the base layer of things. It's like the bare CBD land in the middle of like Sydney or in here Brisbane City, and it has nothing to do with it. And people can say that it's bare piece of land. It doesn't generate any yield. Like, how can I profit from that? How can I trade it? The point is that you don't trade prime CBD land, right? There are things that you can build on top of it. You can put up a say a signpost and collect ad revenue, or you can rent it out, or you can build buildings on it and collect rent from tenants. So we'll start to see that kind of like engagement within the new world and the old world, trying to make sense of this thing. And like, people are confused about where Bitcoin is in terms of the product layers, and where Ethereum, all this other stuff that is on top of it, like DeFi, NFTs. And I want to say that they all have their place to play, but they're different. Some of them are land, some of them are buildings, some of them are tenants, some of them are tradies that build the buildings. So you want to make sure that people know exactly what they're dealing with. And I'm personally a very big advocate of clearer labeling in this space, and that sort of aligns with Monochrome stance on getting more regulation, more experienced operators, more responsible spokesperson into this space, because there's so many information asymmetry in this space, and we need to really do a good job to clean it up.
I love it, because, you know, that's what I'm trying to do with the whole ETF tracker thing. Like, I come from industry and I was doing this, like I said, personally, but it's turned into a bit of a cause where I'm trying to help people lift the hood under ETFs and really see what's going on, because you hear a lot of stuff in the news, but you need to have these tools, and a lot of people just haven't had these tools available. It's still growing, and I'm keen to see how you guys go. We'll definitely be keeping a watchful eye. So we'll put all this kind of stuff in the show notes for where people can follow along and see the journey and hopefully get involved. But Jeff, thank you very much. It's been super insightful. I learned a lot here, as I always do with these kind of interviews. And I'll get people to follow along with your journey. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that. It's a good chat.
Okay, cheers. Well, that was an amazing set of insights there from Jeff, and we certainly learned a lot more about Bitcoin and his background, as well as how the space has evolved over time. So it's certainly an exciting time if you're interested in it from an ETF perspective. We should see more news about that, and no doubt we'll track along, put that in the newsletters, and share more of this kind of stuff. So you should take a look at the show notes as well on Spotify. If you're on the website, it'll also be there, but on YouTube as well. So we'll have a couple of links to the Monochrome blog and various other sources of information there. There's certainly a lot to learn. We love keeping on learning, and we love keeping you guys informed as to what we find out. So please do like, share, and subscribe, and we hope you have a great week.